Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest webinar brought to you by the Chartered Institute of Export and International Trade. Today's webinar is sponsored by TariffTel, and you'll hear a bit more from them later. But to give you a quick introduction, my name is Phil Abnett. I'm a senior content editor here at the Chartered Institute, and today we're here to talk all about classification. Classification is one of those areas where compliance can come unstuck, and there's a lot of risk around this area. It's where costs can quickly mount and seemingly small decisions can have huge regulatory consequences, particularly when you're dealing with things like near identical product codes that land under completely different product labels that land under completely different product tariff codes. Classification is increasingly seen as a strategic consideration in international trade operations. We'll be hearing later on from Anna Doherty and Liz Davies, who are two leading experts in this sector. But before we begin, I'd like to introduce everyone to one of our regular polls. This one just got setting the scene while I talk through the normal list of housekeeping notes. So what's your biggest challenge with classification right now? You should see a link in the chat. Yep, there we are. Thank you, Humera. A couple of housekeeping notes before we begin properly. Firstly, we will be sending a copy of the recording out to you after the event. You should have it in your inbox within 48 hours, so please keep an eye out there. The second thing to note is we will be answering some of your questions live in the using the Q&A tab. Please send them all through here. We'd like to keep it as open as possible, so kindly don't make them too company or sector specific. It means I can make them as general as possible. Secondly, the shorter questions I like to get prioritized simply because it's easy for me to read them. So if you just bear that in mind. I'll give it another few seconds. Again, just if you go down to the poll section on the right, you'll see everything there. So a few people have, the poll link is not working. Let me double check that. Yes, sorry, there's just a bit of an issue there. The link should be with you now. Apologies everyone, it went in the wrong chat. I do give some apologies there. But without further ado, you should be able to vote on that as we go on. I'd like to pass over on the next slide to Liz. Liz, how are you today?
Good afternoon. I'm good, thank you.
Brilliant. I'll be back with you in a few minutes, but Liz, over to you.
Okay. So as Phil says, we're going to talk today about classification and how it all begins with the code. You know, it all starts with the classification. You know, it's the critical starting point for your compliance. Everything is linked to the commodity code. You know, is there a free trade agreement available? Can I get preference on this product? Do I need to consider anti-dumping? Is it a Mercy code? Is this a CBAM product? You know, all these questions all stem from the commodity code. That's the beginning. So if you start off on the wrong foot, it only gets worse from then on. So it's worth putting the time and effort in the beginning so you get this part of the process right. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about myself. Some of you may have met me before at events with the Institute or at other events, maybe at CETA. But I've worked at TariffTel for nearly 5 years. I run a team of classification experts. We've got some big clients that we do all the classification for, like Primark and Marks & Spencer and Asda. Personally, I've worked in logistics and supply chain for over 30 years. I know I don't look that old, but I have. And 15 years of this was at Siemens in automotive and transportation, but I've worked in aerospace as well, so I've worked quite a lot of industries. We've been working with the Institute now for a couple of years, and this is our second webinar together. Next slide, please. So if we look, like we said, accurate classification is central to any customs declaration. In 2024 alone, 84 million import and export declarations passed through the UK borders, And every single one of these is reliant on the correct tariff code. Yet companies and businesses of all sizes still insist on Googling or running spreadsheets or very manual processes, leaving them very exposed when it comes to classification. You know, it can lead to costly errors and potential incorrect duty payments either under or over. And with a good process or system, this is 100% avoidable. When we audit businesses, and this is across, again, various sectors, we can find up to 40% of codes are incorrect. And this can be across companies that think they have a process, you know, and think they have a system in place. So it's quite tricky, you know, and apart from being uncompliant, misclassification can be expensive, especially if it's undetected for many years. So you need to ask yourself, you know, can you afford to get it right? Instead of asking that, can you afford to get it wrong, really? Because the cost of correcting it will far outweigh the cost that you have to put in at the beginning to get it right. I mean, apart from mispaid duties and being non-compliant, you could be subject to fines or penalties. There's a lot of press in this area at the moment. You could have delays or demurrage or lose your credibility with customs, which gives a spotlight on your business for further audits. Next slide, please. You know, so we look at the devil is in the detail. You know, you need to know your product. It is challenging, but know your product, you know, understand your product, the detail of product requirements, the detail that you need for importing or exporting your product. I would say a lot of people think, I've just got a product, I'll Google it, I'll just search the tariff book, a basic description, I'll roughly get a code and I'll go with that, you know. What you actually need is this detailed product information, you know, understanding what information do I need about my product, subscription to the WCO, reading the explanatory notes, understanding the tariff book, reading the chapter, section notes, additional notes, looking at rulings, and then subscribing to be abreast of changes that are coming through on either explanatory notes or stop press. You know, and behind all that, obviously, it's understanding the GRIs and having this customs expertise so that you know what to do with all this information and know how to use it to classify your products. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to go through a couple of examples really here. Halloween products, I mean, we call it the Nightmare Before Christmas, as it's adequately named. Here we have this lovely plastic rat, which personally I wouldn't want to buy. But I mean, in this slide, what we're demonstrating is, you know, you've got with this product, you could be an importer into the EU and into the US, and this product is treated completely differently, completely different tariff codes, completely different duties, and it's up to you to manage that difference. You know, this difference in interpretation across regions adds this greater complexity. So, I mean, if we look at the EU, for example, you know, this is a plastic rat. They would say it's not a toy, but we'd be looking at an ornamental plastical article. Generally, the EU and the UK do not see this as a Halloween product. They're very specific on generally pumpkins that have a jack-o'-lantern style about them. Although it's subjective, you know, you can sometimes find BTIs for other products. But generally, ghosts, witches, bats, you know, they don't consider that they are Halloween. They would just consider them to be, you know, articles of plastic, or ornamental articles, decorative articles. Whereas if you look at the US, you know, they would say that this product is specifically designed and marketed for use in Halloween. Again, it's not a toy, it's not to be played with, but it's because it's got not a utilitarian function, it's Halloween product, in which case it would go to 9505. So a very different approach. You know, the US generally ghosts, bats, witches, Halloween, and the EU and the UK not the same. So this just gives this added complexity. If you're importing into these two regions, you need to understand that, and you need to make sure you've got the correct interpretation, the correct tariff code, and the correct duties. Next slide, please. Again, this is another example, you know, Nightmare After Halloween is Christmas products, and Christmas products are equally as challenging. I talked about Christmas before on a previous webinar, and again, we have another wording change here. In 2022, the wording change was around hanging tree decorations. So prior to 2022, you know, your hanging tree decoration had to have a connection with Christmas. It had to have Merry Christmas on it. You know, you get a lot of decorations you can hang on trees that are Mickey Mouse baubles and things like that. So all of that was constituent material, not Christmas products. And again, there's this difference in duty. So that change came through in 2022, which was welcomed by, you know, a lot of the retailers, that we could go into Christmas products and take advantage of the lower duty rate. And then what we have again here, again, is very conflicting now, because we've got two different data sources for the same product. So the WCO in June this year, they updated their notes to state that these sort of products, so we've got a little Robin in a little Santa outfit. So his textile felt Robin. So the WCO are now saying, because he has a Santa outfit on, that he can now be associated with Christmas, and we can be classified to 9505, you know, and get this lower duty rate. But the additional chapter notes within the HMRC tariff book have not been updated, and they still state the old wording, which reads that articles of a winter season, you know, whether they're dressed up as in Santa outfits or any association with Christmas, cannot be considered Christmas. So they still must be classified to 6307. So now you've got two different sources of data giving you different information, you know, but because they've not updated these additional chapter notes, it's important that we can't put this change through our system yet, and we can't, you know, advise our retailers to change this. So we're eagerly awaiting this change. You know, we're keeping abreast and keeping up to date to make sure that when this change comes through, we can inform everybody, and, you know, they can take advantage of this lower duty rate. But until that time, we would be non-compliant, you know, to change this at the moment. So that just, again, just shows you the added complexity into classification and the data. Okay, I think next slide. I think I'll pass over to Anna now.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Anna Doherty. I'm a Customs Practice Director here at the Chartered Institute. A lot of you will probably have seen me before in one of these webinars. Classification is one of my favorite subjects because, and hence the title of this webinar, because I always say it all begins with a code. You choose an incorrect classification, or you follow the steps to classify your product incorrectly, and it's almost as if you have taken a wrong exit on a motorway, which can take you down a road of either over compliance or under compliance, neither of them being really optimal. And Les just talked about a couple of products which are very where classification is dependent on the interpretation, and it brings us to these kind of two core principles of classification, both which need to be understood before you even begin to try and classify a product. One is the intended use, and the other one is the essential character. The intended use is tends to be quite easy to establish, especially for simple products. However, for a single product could have multiple intended uses. If you take postage stamps, for instance, if you're classifying postage stamps for their purpose of being a postage stamp, as in paying for sending letters and parcels, they'll have one classification, one commodity code. However, if you look at the postage stamps that may be old, treated for philanthropists as antiques, they'll go into antiques classification code based on their intended use. And similarly, when we talk about the Christmas element, it comes down to the essential character of a product. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges with classification, where establishing the essential character of a product is open to interpretation. Because while we have the general rules of interpretation that we follow in order, taking us into the heading first and then finding the subheading, the essential character is one where you sometimes have quite a different interpretations, not only by the different institutions or customs authorities, but also even by the people that are classifying the product. So why classification matters and why does it matter now? If I can have the next slide, please. Thank you. Classification is what I like to call it, or a lot of people do as well. It's a common language for parties involved in cross-border movement of goods, exporters, importers, customs agents, customs officials, because of course we have plenty of countries trading internationally. Descriptions can be quite simple or they can be quite complex. On a commercial invoice, there is no standardization of descriptions. There is no single language. So how can we identify goods that we trade internationally? Through a HS classification. HS classification, which is the first 6 digits of a commodity code, is based on World Customs Organization HS Convention and the harmonized system, which is now used by over 200 countries and serves as a basis for their own customs systems, providing an element of global standardization. In the UK, the primary legislation providing the legal basis for the customs tariff system is the TCTA and specifically Section 8. And from TCTA stems the Customs Tariff Establishment Regulations, which establish the rules about how to apply tariffs. It established the legal basis for the commodity codes. Now, a lot of you are probably very familiar with the online trade tariff. Now, that is just a kind of a search engine to easily look up commodity codes and access the general rules of interpretation. However, the legal basis for them stems from the Customs Tariff Establishment Regulations. And classification is rooted in international rules and also nationally applied. Accordingly, it's a legal requirement to classify products accurately, but not with the intent to reduce duty or avoid control measures by selecting an incorrect commodity code. Now, of course, there is an element of interpretation with classification where you're in between 2 classifications. There's a what we like to call a tariff engineering, and making sure that you're designing your product with the specific commodity code in mind to make sure that you're complying with the appropriate measures. And governments, including the UK government, use classification for various reasons. Obviously, the most common one is the customs aspects. That is the application of duties, import duties, any anti-dumping duties, any additional measures, import VAT and excise on the goods. So that tells you, together with the origin of the goods, how much money you have to pay to import the product. It also applies control measures at the border. Any licenses, any certificates, any documentary requirements, they're often linked to a commodity code as well. Again, if you look up the trade tariff, you will be able to see as part of your commodity code whether the product could be subject to additional licensing requirements, such as CITES licenses or maybe export control regulations. Classification is also used for security purposes because in addition to a description of the goods, border authorities such as like Border Force in the UK can use classification to determine what products are being moved across the border. That then helps them with their intelligence activities at the border and the assessment of the risk of smuggling and criminal activities. If I could have the next slide, please. Beyond those 3 points, classification is also extremely important for 2 purposes in terms of the international trade development. One is data gathering. All the WTO and WCO members are required to produce data statistics on goods being traded. And the only way you can do that is by looking at the classification of the goods that are being imported and exported. This also then informs international trade policy within individual governments, looking at spikes and loss of products, seeing perhaps shifts in terms of where the goods are being traded from and to, whether any other policies are impacting movement of goods. This is where classification comes in as that sort of single point of reference, and as well as administration of other policy objectives at the border that are perhaps not necessarily strictly linked to international trade, but of course we are seeing the rise in additional measures applied to goods traded at the border. Big ticket items at the moment is of course CBAM and EUDR. Goods are being put into the basket of does it apply, does it not, through the classification. If I could have the next slide, please. So what are the regulatory changes that we have seen recently or that are upcoming and that mean that you really need to have a look at the classification, and why does the accuracy matter? Because as I said, you choose a wrong commodity code, you go down the wrong route. Liz was talking earlier about the underpayment and overpayment of the duties. Absolutely, we see that quite a lot as well, because depending on the type of the product that you're looking at, if you choose a wrong commodity code, you could end up in a space where you're paying 6% instead of 0%. So those are quite significant shifts. As I mentioned, CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, places goods in scope based on its classification. The Russian sanctions, now export controlled goods, whether they're dual use or military goods, they have a very specific list under the export control order where you need to verify that your product, regardless of its classification, meets the requirements for meeting the requirements of being a dual use or a military product. However, we also have a common high list priority items. These are the goods that are not dual use and not military, or they're not dual use and not military, but that they have been found on the battlefield in Ukraine. So they are designated as common high priority items when exported. And they're subject to additional checks. Again, that's based on the classification. Free trade agreements assign product-specific rules of origin based on classification of the goods. So if you misclassify the product, you may be going down the route of looking at an entirely wrong rules of origin. Trade defense measures such as anti-dumping duties, they apply based on the classification of the product, including application of appropriate GIRs. There was a quite interesting legal case in Belgium and France in the last year or so, where an importer of electronic e-bikes, which should be subject to anti-dumping duty from China, was importing the e-bikes as individual components, trying to avoid the anti-dumping. However, GIRs are very clear that the disassembled product has the same classification as your finished product, and therefore, even if they're coming in separately, they should still be treated as the finished product, and they should be therefore subject to anti-dumping duties. People went to jail. There was a lot of fines, I believe over 4 million euros in fine. So this is why accuracy and not only selecting the correct commodity code, but actually following the general rules of interpretation is extremely important. And then if I could have my final slide, please. So there's things that have been happening quite recently that kind of put a spotlight on classification. One is ICS 2 changes, so import control system. This is safety and security declarations for movements into the EU. Phase 3 for road rail has been now implemented, although certain countries have a derogation until 1st of January. Or 31st of December, sorry, I should say, where in addition to goods description, 6-digit HS code is going to be mandatory for the safety and security declarations. So that is a step where additional parties within the supply chain may be responsible for entering classification and ensuring that that is entered correctly. And then, of course, the biggest change that recently has happened and that really shone a light on classification is the US tariff measures since April. Now, of course, the reciprocal rates that are in place, they apply based on the origin of the product to all the products from a particular country. However, when we look at some of the additional measures, such as Section 232 duties, which are applicable to aircraft parts, to aluminium, to steel content, to copper, all of these apply to goods based on their HS classification. So your product is only in scope of these additional duties based on the classification of the product. And we have absolutely seen businesses that have been exporting to the US for a really, really long time now hit with Section 232 duties, which could add 25 to 50% to the value of the product, looking at ways to check whether they have been classifying the product correctly, whether there is anything that they should be doing differently, whether there is any movement to see whether they can classify the product into one that is not in scope. Now, of course, if it is in scope, it is, and there's nothing that can be done about it. But it's definitely triggered quite a lot of businesses to relook at their classifications. And the other thing that would really shine a spotlight is the removal of de minimis customs exemption, meaning that all shipments into the US, regardless of their value, now must undergo customs formalities. Previously, the US had an $800 de minimis, so a lot of e-commerce shipments would have been under that particular limit, whereas now they need to follow through the entire kind of customs process and have classification, valuation, origin, and everything else. So that is definitely where we're seeing quite a lot of changes there. All right, thank you. I think that's it for me for now.
It is indeed, Anna. Thank you so much, as always. So before we move on to Liz, we're just going to have the second of our polls for today to sort of gauge your reaction. How confident are you that your classifications would stand up to an audit? So very confident, somewhat confident, not confident, never really considered it. So we do use these questions in some about outreach and planning for future webinars. So do give us your answers. Also, do keep an eye out on the follow-up, because we will run a survey as always to gauge your action, and we do value your feedback as always. I can see some more questions coming in. So thank you, Tricia, and thank you, Laura. If we could have the results of the previous poll up when you have a second, Humera. Okay, no worries. We're just taking it. Oh, it should be on screen shortly, if everyone could just bear with me. So from the previous poll, yeah, about 28% said the biggest challenge for classification was high complexity of products, then inconsistency across markets, keeping up regulatory changes was 31% lead to them. Documentation only had 1 vote, interesting enough, and training awareness across teams made up the rest. Anna and Liz, did this surprise you in any way?
No, not at all. That's generally what we see, really. You know, if you've got, like I said, you are a business with this big complexity of different products in different areas, you know, such as a retailer like Primark, you know, they go from sort of clothing to Halloween products, or Marks and Spencer, from food to furniture to clothing. You know, there is a lot of complexity and different requirements and different questions need to be asked for these different products. So yeah, it's not.
I would agree. I think this is quite a lot of things that we see in common for classification, especially for businesses that are continuously bringing new products to market. Even when looking at spare parts for a product, sometimes, you know, an O-ring, if it's designed specifically for a machine, it's classified with the machine. If it's just one where you went to Argos to pick one up and it can fit anywhere else, it's a part in its own. So that's where a lot of that complexity comes in, and understanding the application of the rules, and also how you're going to be using that product in order to classify it confidently and correctly.
I see. Thank you both. Well, I'm going to disappear once again. If we just have the presentation back up, and then I'm going to pass back over to Liz for the next section of the presentation. Over to you, Liz.
Thank you. Okay, so we've talked a lot about how complex it is. So what's the solution? I mean, what do you do? How can you make sure you have all the data you need for all these different complexity and all these products? How can you make sure you're following all the rules and guidance, using all these right data sources, and having that customs expertise to back it up? You need a solid, disciplined, systematic approach. And this is where, I mean, as a company, Tarifftel, that's what we do. You know, we've got a system that's built to handle this. You can see on screen, this is what we do. We feed all the data in from all the different data sources, and then we have API links to all the books, and then we build decision trees within our system to give these classification options to our clients. So you don't need to have any classification knowledge because we do all the work for you. You know, we're doing all that work within the system. Next slide, please. So, I mean, what we do is we believe the best approach is to collect that data at source. So, you know, your suppliers, they know their product, they manufacture it, they understand it, you know, they've got detailed product knowledge, what it's made of, how it's made, how it's going to be used. So you need to ask, are you utilising your suppliers to collect all this data? I mean, as long as you know the right questions to ask, then they can provide all this information. They're a valuable source of knowledge. The reason when we built this system so that we do, our suppliers and clients don't need to have a vast amount of classification knowledge. You know, it's an online system and we offer a unique and comprehensive approach to classification to make sure that the businesses are compliant, from small businesses to very large businesses. So, I mean, if you look at the process flow there, just to give you just a brief overview of our system, what we do is we don't integrate with people's systems at all. So there's no security risk, because I know that's quite high on people's agendas at the moment. You know, everything is done with APIs. So we're not in anybody's systems at all. So we just send and receive the data. So normally we would get a feed into our system from a client that could be from their master data, or it could be that they want to utilise their suppliers, so they send through all their purchase orders, and then we enrich that data in our system. So, you know, if the data purchase order says t-shirt, then that's as much as we can populate. If the purchase order says ladies cotton t-shirt, then we will enrich all that data so that we can minimise the amount of data that needs to be supplied by the supplier. So all the suppliers do is go in and log and then answer the questions, specific questions about their product. They have to be relevant. So if it was a leather jacket, I don't need to ask a gender, I don't need to ask a weight. You know, if it's a woven cotton padded jacket, I need the weight, I need the gender, I need the construction. So these are examples. We know what questions to ask, you know, to who and when. So we only ask the minimum amount of questions so that we're not putting this extra burden into the system of people having to provide vast amounts of data. But what we're doing is getting accurate product data at the right time. And then that goes into our system, and then they can upload and store images. I mean, as Anna mentioned, you can have documentation in the system. So you could have your Martindale tests for slippers, or drop tests for sunglasses for the US. You know, it's all linked to the product. So it's a centralized system where you're linking all your product data, you're linking all the decisions that you've made about your product to classify it, and all your documentation. So when we get into talking about digital product passports in the future, all this information is there in one central database, you know, one central system, basically. So then what happens is the system will generate a code, and then somebody needs to sign that code off. It can be automated, but we do like a lot of our clients like this two-step approach, you know, this eyes on, we call it. You want to make sure that the suppliers entered the right information, and you know, the right coders and profit, and then it will link you to all the other things that you need to do. You know, is it CBAM, is it anti-dumping, you know, and different regions as well. I'm importing to the US or the EU, like I said before, your plastic rat, different codes, different duties. You know, the system will give you all that information. And it's a full traceability end to end. You like to say, you can see who answered what questions and when, who made the decision, who signed it off. You know, it's a full audit trail. So if HMRC audits you, you've got all that data in your fingertips. Nobody's running around trying to look for how we classified this product, what did we do, what paperwork did we raise. You know, everything is all there on your fingertips. So it's simple, reliable, efficient, you know, and it's all there for you. I mean, for us as a company, at the moment we have an application, but we're just launching our new product, which is on the website. It's a web-based product, so it's easy to sign up. It's much easier to use online. So it's an exciting time for us that we're going to be able to, you know, share this with a lot more clients basically now. So yeah, I think that's it from me. This is just a slide just from our website. So we're using a lot more dashboards, you know, so your supplier and the client can all see the same live information together and then use that to make, you know, good decisions together.
Thank you, Liz. So just on the next slide, I'm on the final poll before we get to the Q&A section, where everyone can ask their questions. Thanks to those that have come in already. Do appreciate it as always. So the final question, which should be popping up in the chat now. Which of these would most improve your classification process? Centralized consistent data across the business, automated updates alerts when tariff rules change, stronger supplier collaboration on product data, audit-ready reporting, training for non-specialist teams. So yeah, just before we get to the Q&A, the reminder as always, if you could keep them as brief as and sector agnostic as possible, and try not make them too tailored to your business. Just gives me a chance to ask some questions to Liz and Anna that are as broad as possible. I mean, we can answer for everyone in the room today because we've got over 100 people on the call. So I'm just going to give that another couple of seconds to run. Thank you as always for your responses. I'm just going to if we can move on to the, oh no, that's fine. So I'm just going to start the just going to share the results now that I can see they're just popping onto the screen. So just lost them for a second. There we go. So in the previous poll, how confident are you that your classifications will stand up to an audit? Interestingly, about 71% of people said they were somewhat confident, with 20% saying they were very confident. Only about 8% in total said either they were not confident or hadn't really considered it. Liz and Anna, if I can invite you back on stage, do you have any sort of initial thoughts about this?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I said before, really, we find even companies sometimes that are confident, you know, it'll depend on what process and system they're using, because if they're using spreadsheets and then they can easily become out of date or corrupted. And it'll depend on the type of products as well. If you've got very simple products and you've really got a few classification codes, then you probably don't need to invest in a big system and you know, you can handle it. But it's when you've got this high complexity where you need to be looking for more of a, you know, a system type approach, really. But yeah, it's interesting because we generally do find about 40% of errors when we do audit people that have this high complexity of SKUs.
I would say I'm pretty surprised, and I have two thoughts about this. One is perhaps businesses have binding decisions, so either a BTI from the EU or ATA, so they feel like they have the confidence in the commodity code, so they have been verified by HMRC, or the opposite end of the scale, they may not have yet been subject to a classification check, and therefore they feel that they would be confident. Now, I don't know, you know, we have over 100 people here and that have responded, so maybe they have been through the check, and maybe they have brilliant people that know exactly what they're doing and following the right steps, having the right interpretation, and having the right processes in place. And if so, very well done, continue doing what you're doing. But we do see that quite a lot of businesses, especially post EU exit, they may not have yet been through to a HMRC subject check on classification. They may not have to explain why they've gone down a particular route, especially when we go down to sort of conversations about quite technical products where the duty rate between a part and a product could be slightly different, or maybe where you have teams that are classifying that are not necessarily really maybe not confident, but they're not customs people. You know, we do see that in businesses where classification is done by procurement teams and just duplicating a previous part of a similar description and just choosing to go with exactly the same commodity code as the previous product because it hasn't changed that much, whereas actually it could have changed quite significantly.
Thanks both. So just moving on to the Q&A section. So this first one came in the chat. This is from Laura. Our codes are generally very straightforward. I've not yet seen any, but are there new comms codes being developed for plastics with a high recyclable content? Who wants to answer this one first?
I'll take that one. I'm not sure whether there's anything being specific for the high recyclable content film. However, the way that the commodity codes work, the first 6 digits are from WCO HS harmonized system. Harmonized system, it goes through a review every few years. Usually it's a 5-year cycle, and we are in the middle of another cycle now. So the decision about which new commodity codes to implement would have been made about 3 years ago now, and it's now going through the various committees. So when the commodity codes come out in 2027, they're not going to be reflective of the brand new technologies that we're seeing right now. It was only 2022 HS that brought in a specific commodity code for a smartphone. Prior to that, it was we had to classify it as machinery of various functions. So there may be ones, if you feel like you want a specific commodity code for yourself, you can always go to your customs authority and they can advocate on your behalf to WCO and bring it up to the WCO committee to actually propose a new commodity code being developed.
Thank you very much. We've got a few minutes left, so I'm just going to look through the Q&A tab here. So this next one is from Tricia. Is it the exporter or importer of goods responsible for defining the codes? Liz, am I good to throw this one to you first, then bring that to Anna?
Yeah, it's the importer of record that's responsible for the classification.
I'll just add something to that, because you're responsible for classification to your own customs authority. So when you're exporting, you're responsible for the commodity code at export. And if you're importing and you're the importer, you're responsible for that commodity code at import. Your exporter and your importer could completely disagree. Ultimately, those systems are not linked. Yes, you're using the same commercial invoice to export and import your product, but as a UK exporter, you're only responsible for the commodity code in the UK, unless, of course, you're acting as an importer of record in the final destination country. For instance, if you're exporting on DDP basis and you're taking on that responsibility.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Liz, I'm going to throw this one for you. This is from Michael, specifically about TariffTel service. If we use the TariffTel service and it was later discovered that the HS code provider was incorrect, who bears responsibility for the error? Us as the exporter, or is liability shared with TariffTel?
Yeah, interesting question. We don't share liability. I mean, like I say, it's the importer, the exporter that's responsible. But what I can say is that the clients that we just talked about, we work with, we've been working for these clients for 10 to 15 years. We don't just sell the software and then disappear into the night. You know, we support that software. So if ever it's profit a code that you don't agree with, then we're available, my team are available we're always constantly updating that system and constantly, you know, creating new data within it, because new products are being developed all the time. So we're constantly updating it. So it doesn't go, if there is an error in there, it won't go in there for a long time, if you know what I mean, because we're constantly evolving and developing the data within the system. So, and we work with people, you know.
Thanks, Liz. So we're just about to reach the end. So Deborah, slides aren't going to be shared in this specific webinar, but we'll show the recording. And the very quick response to Kelly, if either yourself, Liz, or yourself, Anna, would want to. When shipping to the US, do the first 6 digits need to be the same for both the UK and the US of A?
In an ideal case scenario, they will be, because the first 6 digits are WCO, right? So all the WCO countries, including UK and the US, are working to the same interpretation. However, while the UK and the EU are quite consistent in their interpretation of classification, the US is not so consistent, and therefore sometimes they may take a slightly different approach. They can take an entirely different approach. And what happens then if you, as an exporter, disagree with the commodity code at the importing country? Ultimately, the importer's responsibility. They can apply for a binding ruling. They can request that from the customs authority. In the US, this would be a cross ruling, where providing details of the product will bring in a binding decision, and then they ultimately for that information going into their own custom system. So it doesn't need to be the same. The challenges are when you're using kind of the same documentation, ultimately you may be asking for additional information. You could be putting on your commercial invoice, commodity code for export is this, commodity code for import is this. There's multiple ways that I've seen businesses work around it, but no, they don't absolutely have to be. Would it raise flags at the other end? Probably. Do you want to have a conversation with your customer about why have you classified it in a particular way, why they're trying to classify it in another way? It might be that they expose it to you that you should be looking at a slightly different classification. Doesn't mean you're right or they're wrong. Or it means that you may want to go and get a binding ruling yourself from your own authority.
Yeah, I think
Thanks,
just
Anna.
adding to that, if you look at the RAT example I gave earlier, different 6-digit code for US and EU. Unfortunately, you know, we like to say that everybody follows the WCO. In reality, the US do what they like a little bit. Unfortunately, they follow it as much as the EU and the UK. So you do have to bear that in mind.
Very much. Chloe and Tommy, thanks for your questions. We have reached the end of today's presentation. So if I can just get the final slide up. Thank you for both Liz and Anna for this time today. Just a reminder that TariffTel and Liz and Anna will all be at the Import Expert Show, which is taking place next month. The details will be on screen shortly. So please do say hi if you're coming down. Both of them will have a stand there. So TariffTel will have a stand there. Anna will be hosting a panel specifically on customs topics. Other than that, do keep an eye on your emails. We'll be sharing the recording later on, as well as some further details of what's been discussed today. Otherwise, thank you so much for your time, and we will catch you. We'll catch you at the next webinar. Hope to see you at IES. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.